I sacrificed my time, my dreams, and my hard-earned money to give my parents a better life. But just when I thought I had secured a home for us, my mother did the unthinkable. She handed it over to my stepsister, claiming I didn't deserve it. I stood up, smiled, and walked away. 30 minutes later, they were the ones crying. I never imagined that my own family would betray me. If you had told me years ago that the people I loved the most would steal from me and just justify it as if I didn't matter, I would have laughed. But life has a way of proving us wrong. I've always been the responsible one. The one who worked hard, saved money, and did what was right. It wasn't because I wanted recognition, it was just who I was. I built my life with discipline and patience, working long hours as a real estate agent in Austin, Texas. Every dollar I saved came from the effort I put into my career. I didn't take vacations. I skipped nights out with friends. I lived in a small apartment, thinking that one day I would use my savings to buy my dream home. But when my parents called me, panicked and desperate, saying they were about to lose their house, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't a choice for me. It was my family, and family helps each other. They had raised me, put a roof over my head. How could I turn my back on them? So I gave them $145,000. Every penny I had saved over 10 years of hard work. It wasn't a loan, it was my investment in a new home for them. But there was one condition. The house would be in my name since I was the one paying for it. They agreed. My stepfather, Robert, even thanked me, saying, "This family would fall apart without you, Hannah." My mother, Linda, hugged me tightly and called me her blessing. I believed them. For weeks, we searched for the perfect home, and I fell in love with a beautiful property in a quiet neighborhood. It had everything. A big front porch, a spacious kitchen, a backyard that could have been perfect for family barbecues. It felt like a fresh start, like I was building something that would finally bring us all together. And then my stepsister Emily got involved. Emily was 2 years older than me. She had always been the deserving one in my mother's eyes. She had 2 kids, and her life was one financial disaster after another. She never had a stable job, but somehow she always had an excuse for why she needed more help. I knew my parents favored her. It had always been like that. But I never thought they would betray me for her. The day of the housewarming party was supposed to be a celebration. The house was finally ours. I stood in the kitchen, arranging snacks, feeling proud that I had done something good for my family. Then my mother cleared her throat. The room quieted down. She smiled, looking around at our friends and relatives. "I just want to take a moment to say how grateful we are," she began. "This house means everything to us. And I want to thank Hannah for making it possible." I felt warmth spread through me. Maybe for once she truly appreciated what I had done. But she continued, her voice changing. "As much as Hannah has been generous, this house isn't really for her." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "It belongs to Emily," my mother said. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked around the room, searching for some kind of explanation, thinking maybe I had heard wrong. But then I saw Emily's smug smile. She wasn't shocked. She knew. My stepfather, Robert, nodded along, as if this had been the plan all along. I turned to my mother, my voice shaking. "What are you talking about?" She sighed like I was being difficult. "Hannah, you don't have kids. You can always save up again. But Emily has a family. She needs stability more than you do." My hands were trembling. "We had an agreement. This house is in my name." She didn't even look guilty. She just waved a document in my face, the deed. But when I saw it, my name wasn't on it anymore. Emily's was. I felt the world tilt beneath me. "You changed the deed?" I whispered. "We already filed the paperwork," my stepfather, Robert, said, not even meeting my eyes. "The house is in Emily's name now." I felt the room closing in on me, the walls pressing in from all sides. Emily stepped forward. "I know you're upset," she said, pretending to sound sympathetic. "But you don't need this house like I do. You have your career. You have your own life. My kids need a home." Her kids. That was their justification. That was their excuse for stealing from me. I looked around the room, expecting someone to say something to tell them this was wrong. But all I saw were awkward glances, whispers behind hands. No one stood up for me except one person. My Uncle Richard, standing in the corner, shaking his head in disbelief. "This isn't right," he said, his voice steady and strong. "Hannah paid for this house. You can't just take it from her." But my mother ignored him. "She's overreacting," she said, waving a dismissive hand. I felt sick. I had sacrificed everything for them, and they had been planning this behind my back. My mother sighed like she was exhausted by my reaction. "Hannah, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're not homeless. You have a good job. Emily needs this more than you." I wanted to scream, to grab the deed out of her hands and tear it into pieces. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. They had already done it. I left the party without another word. As I walked out the door, I heard Emily laughing, talking about how she would redo the kitchen, maybe knock down a wall to make more space. She was planning renovations on my house. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the rage and betrayal. I had been played, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I drove around Austin for hours that night, unable to go home, unable to process what had just happened. Every time I replayed the conversation in my head, my stomach twisted with anger. They had stolen from me my own mother, my own family, and they had done it so casually, as if I was supposed to just accept it and walk away. I finally parked outside Sophie's apartment, my hand still shaking as I texted her. Within minutes, she was at the door, pulling me inside. "Hannah, what happened?" she asked, eyes wide with concern. I tried to explain, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I even begin to say it? That the people who were supposed to love me had just robbed me in broad daylight? Sophie guided me to the couch, handed me a glass of water, and waited. I took a deep breath and finally let it all out. The party, the announcement, the changed deed, Emily's smug face, my mother's dismissive words. When I finished, Sophie was furious. "They did what?" she nearly shouted, standing up. "Hannah, this isn't just betrayal, this is fraud." I swallowed hard. I hadn't even thought of it in those terms. All I could focus on was the sheer injustice of it all. "But what can I do?" I whispered. "They've already filed the paperwork." Sophie paced the room, her mind racing. "You need to talk to Mark," she said firmly. Mark, her brother, a real estate lawyer. I hesitated, taking legal action against my own family. It felt extreme. But then I pictured Emily parading around my house, planning renovations, acting like she had won some prize, and my hesitation vanished. "I'll call him in the morning," I said. Sophie nodded. "Good, but first you need to get proof." Mother had always kept important documents in a folder on top of the refrigerator. If they hadn't gotten rid of it yet, it might still be there. Sophie grabbed her car keys. "We're getting it now." It was almost midnight when we pulled up to my parents' house. Most of the guests had left, but a few cars remained in the driveway. "We have to be quick," I whispered as we crept toward the back door. The house was quiet, but as we stepped inside, I could hear muffled voices coming from the living room. My mother, my stepfather, Emily, Sophie, and I moved quickly. I went straight to the kitchen, reached up to the top of the refrigerator, and felt around until my fingers closed around the thin, familiar folder. My breath caught. It was still there. I pulled it down and flipped through the papers. And then I saw it, the original agreement. My name clearly written as the legal owner of the house. Then behind it, another document, a letter from their lawyer. I skimmed it quickly, my pulse racing. The lawyer had warned them 2 weeks ago that transferring the house without my consent was illegal. They had known. They had done it anyway. "Got it," I whispered to Sophie, shoving the papers into my bag. We slipped out of the house as quietly as we had entered, my heart pounding the entire time. As soon as we were back in the car, I let out a shaky breath. Sophie turned to me, her expression hard. "This is proof, Hannah. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They committed fraud." The next morning, I sat in Mark's office. The documents spread across his desk. He read through them in silence, his jaw tightening as he flipped each page. When he finally looked up, there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Hannah, this isn't just a civil case. This is criminal fraud." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means they didn't just steal from you," Mark explained. "They could actually face legal consequences." He picked up the letter from their lawyer. They were warned that what they were doing was illegal, and they did it anyway. That makes this a strong case. A part of me felt relieved, but another part, it hesitated. I don't want them to go to jail. I admit it, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark leaned forward. Hannah, they stole everything from you. They counted on you being too nice to fight back. Are you going to let them get away with it? I felt something shift inside me. For years I had been the reliable one, the one who sacrificed, but they had crossed a line. And if I let them win now, what would stop them from doing it again? I took a deep breath. No, I want my house back. Mark nodded. Then let's make that happen. By the end of the day, he had already filed an emergency injunction to prevent them from making any changes to the property. That meant Emily wouldn't be able to sell it, renovate it, or use it as collateral for a loan. That night, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First my mother, then Emily, then Robert. I didn't answer. The next morning, they showed up at my apartment. Hannah, this is ridiculous. My mother said the moment I opened the door, you're suing your own family over a house. I clenched my jaw. My house. Emily crossed her arms. I have 2 kids to take care of. How can you be so selfish? I laughed a sharp, bitter sound. You stole everything from me and I'm the selfish one? We can work something out, Robert said, his voice more nervous than angry. You mean you can find another way to manipulate me? I snapped, not happening. Emily stepped forward, eyes narrowing. You don't even need the house. You're fine. I need this. I held up my bag, pulling out the lawyer's letter. You mean this? I said, watching as the color drained from her face. The one that says what you did was illegal? For the first time, she looked afraid. My mother gasped, where did you? I found it exactly where you left it. The panic in their eyes was almost satisfying. Emily tried to recover, flipping her hair over her shoulder. You wouldn't actually press charges. You wouldn't do that to Mom. But I just smiled, we'll see. And with that, I shut the door in their faces. As I turned away, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. They're scared, good, let them be. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt powerful. The silence in my apartment after I shut the door felt heavier than it should have. My heart was racing, my hands trembling. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to them, to my mother, to Emily, to the people who had always assumed I would just accept whatever they decided for me. And yet, a part of me still felt that familiar guilt creeping in, like a shadow that had been following me since childhood. I sat down, my mind still processing the look on Emily's face when she saw the lawyer's letter. Fear, not just surprise or irritation, actual fear. That meant something. They had been so sure I wouldn't fight back. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was shaky, dramatic, the way it always got when she wanted sympathy. Hannah, please, you don't understand how hard this is for Emily. She's a single mother, she has 2 children. You have so much, you'll be fine. But her, this will destroy her. Please don't do this to us. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. The next day, I met Mark at his office. He had already filed the necessary paperwork, and now we just had to wait for their next move. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, I was sitting on my couch, flipping mindlessly through TV channels when Emily showed up at my apartment again. This time, she wasn't angry, she wasn't smug, she looked tired, worried. Can we talk? She asked. I let her in, but I didn't offer her a seat. I folded my arms, keeping my expression blank. She sighed. Hannah, I know you're upset. Upset? I cut in, my voice sharp. You stole from me, Emily. Her jaw clenched. I didn't steal anything. Mom and Robert, they thought this was best. I scoffed. Best for you. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. Look, I know it looks bad, but I have 2 kids to take care of. I don't have the kind of career you do. I don't have the security. I needed this. I stared at her. So that makes it okay to take everything from me? She hesitated. You don't understand what it's like to have children and feel like you're failing them. I shook my head. No, you don't understand what it's like to work 10 years for something only to have it ripped away. Emily sat down, running a hand through her hair. Mom and Robert, they're scared. They don't know what to do. Good. I stayed quiet, waiting for her to say what she really came here to say. Finally, she looked up at me. Can we fix this without lawyers? I almost laughed. After everything, now she wanted to make a deal? No, I said simply. Her face darkened. You're really going to do this? To your own family? I'm not the one who did this, I reminded her. She stood abruptly, her face flushing with anger. Fine, but when this tears the family apart, that's on you. I didn't even flinch. You tore this family apart when you forged my name on that paperwork. She didn't have anything left to say after that. The next day, things got worse for them. Mark called me early in the morning, his voice calm but firm. Emily and Robert tried to sell the house yesterday. My stomach dropped. What? They tried to list it, but the injunction blocked them. Legally, they can't touch it. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. They were desperate. Good, let them be. But the biggest shock came that night. Ryan, Emily's ex-husband, called me. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Hannah, I heard about what's going on, he said without preamble. His voice was cautious, almost apologetic. I think there's something you should know. I tensed. What is it? He sighed. Emily lied to me about a lot of things, money mostly. When I found out about the house, I did some digging. She took out a loan against it. The air left my lungs. A loan? Yeah, 50 grand. She forged her name on some documents. I felt sick. This wasn't just fraud, this was theft. Ryan hesitated. I already told my lawyer about it, and if you need a witness, I'll help you. I gripped my phone tightly. Why? A bitter chuckle came through the line because she screwed me over too, and I'm done covering for her. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, my heart pounding. Emily hadn't just stolen my house. She had tried to make money off of it. She wasn't just desperate, she was a thief. I called Mark immediately. He listened carefully, then said in a low, even voice, "This changes everything." "How bad is it?" I asked. "For them?" Mark exhaled, "Really bad." I pressed my fingers against my temples. "What do we do now?" "We go for everything." Mark said simply, "Not just the house. Damages, financial penalties, full legal accountability." I closed my eyes. For years I had let them push me around. I had been the good daughter, the understanding sister, the one who never asked for anything in return. Not anymore. I opened my eyes. Do it. That night I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, powerful. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to decide my fate. I was taking it back, and I knew one thing for sure. They had no idea what was coming next. The storm that followed was unlike anything my family had ever experienced. And for once, I wasn't the one caught in the middle. I was the one creating it. After my conversation with Ryan, Mark wasted no time. He filed a lawsuit against Emily, my mother, and Robert for fraud, forgery, and financial damages. We weren't just fighting for the house anymore. We were going after the money she had stolen, the illegal loans she had taken out, and every cent they had tried to squeeze out of me. It didn't take long before the reality of the situation hit them. I was at work when my phone started buzzing nonstop. First my mother, then Robert, then Emily. They knew. I didn't answer. Then came the text messages. Emily was panicking. She wasn't smug anymore. She wasn't justifying what she had done. She was begging. "Hannah, please, we can fix this. Let's talk. No lawyers. You can't do this to your own family." I deleted every single one. The next morning, the police showed up at Emily's house to question her about the forged loan. Mark had warned me that this might happen. A forgery of this size? It wasn't just civil fraud. It was a crime. My mother showed up at my apartment later that afternoon, looking like she had aged 10 years overnight. "Hannah, please," she said the moment I opened the door. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." I folded my arms. "Didn't mean for it to go this far? You stole my house. You tried to erase me like I was nothing." Tears welled in her eyes. The same manipulative tears that had always worked on me. "You have to stop this. The lawsuit, the police, everything. This will ruin our family." I gave a bitter laugh. "No, Mom. You ruined this family." She wiped her face and let out a shaky breath. "Emily is losing everything. Ryan took what little money she had left in the divorce. If she's charged with fraud, she should have thought about that before she stole from me." Mom's expression turned cold. "You're just like your father," she spat. "So selfish. So unwilling to sacrifice for your own family." That hit differently. My father had passed away when I was 6 and my mother remarried Robert within a year. I had spent my childhood feeling like the unwanted extra while Emily had been treated like gold. And I had spent my whole life trying to prove my worth. Now I didn't need to. "I think we're done here," I said, stepping back and shutting the door in her face. That night, Emily finally broke. She called, her voice frantic. "Hannah, please. I'll give everything back. The house, the money, just drop the lawsuit." I closed my eyes, gripping my phone tightly. I had one. I could have backed down. I could have stopped the lawsuit and walked away with just the house. But that wasn't the point anymore. They had spent years taking from me because they thought I would never fight back. And I needed them to learn this would never happen again. "I want a full settlement," I told her, my voice steady. "The house back in my name, $75,000 in damages and a notarized statement admitting to the fraud." "Silence. You're serious?" she whispered. "As serious as you were when you changed the deed behind my back." Emily had no choice. She agreed. A week later, we sat in Mark's office. Emily's hands were shaking as she signed the settlement. My mother refused to look at me. Robert barely spoke. When I signed the last paper, Mark slid the new deed across the table. "Hannah, the house is yours again." I picked it up, holding it between my fingers, and felt something lift off my shoulders. For the first time since the betrayal, I was free, but I wasn't keeping the house. 3 weeks later, I sold it to a developer for more than market value. Emily had assumed I would let them stay there, that I would be the same old Hannah who always forgave and gave in. But that Hannah was gone. I bought a small lakeside cottage outside the city. It was everything I had wanted, peaceful, quiet mine. Sophie helped me move in, laughing as we unpacked. "You should write a book," she joked. "How to Stop Being a Doormat in 3 Easy Steps." I smiled, maybe I should. The texts and calls from my family never really stopped. My mother still tried to guilt-trip me. Emily still tried to play the victim, and Robert just stayed quiet, but I never answered. One afternoon, Uncle Richard came by to visit. He brought a bottle of wine and sat on my new porch with me, watching the lake. "I always knew you were strong," he said, raising his glass. "They just never thought you'd fight back." I smiled, neither did I. And as I looked out over the water, I realized something. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free. And I had never felt freer in my life. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on more exciting content like this. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you in the next one.